I'll make sure recording has started. I assume it is recording. And I'm going to shut up, okay, and let people in.
So, everybody, thanks very much for coming here. The purpose of these 4 sessions is to give you a good grounding in SCCM 2012, understand what's happening in it, understand where it's gone. I would describe it as the phoenix of all of the System Center products. It has changed and progressed, I would say, more than any other product in the System Center suite. Over the last 6 or 8 months, I have been almost all my work has been deploying Config Manager. I've done probably like I've done the 2 biggest deployments of my life. I've just finished a 100,000 user, 2,500 site deployment for a company in the United States, and over the next 4 days I'll be talking about lessons that I've learned, stuff that I've seen, things that I may or may not do, what you might consider doing yourself. I only have a couple of slides, and mainly the purpose of the slides is just to keep me on track, and so I don't lose the run of myself and fly off in different directions. This session is to start you off. It's SCCM design. What roles do I need? Why would I need them? I'm going to quickly go through an SCCM deployment right now. And while it's going on, we're going to discuss all the roles that you would use in System Center and why you would use them, and then we're going to look at a couple of design options. So we're going to say, you have a company with 500 people, 5,000 people, 25,000 people. What would you use and where would you go to, and what decisions would you make? What the idea of this is to stop you making a design decision that completely nails somebody's network, which is what Config Manager will do if it isn't working right. Okay, so let's first of all jump on and have a look. So I have an all-in-one machine here, SCCM all-in-one, that I'm just going to run a deployment on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the setup, and as soon as I've gone through the setup, I'm just going to go back and have a look at some of the options. I got to accept all of the prerequisites. Config Manager does this thing where it gets you to download a bunch of files that it will use during the deployment. Why does it do that? So that Config Manager team can consistently update files that it needs, to do real up-to-date deployments. So it's unlike, sometimes it'll say, do you want to go to Windows Update? Do you want to search for updates? Config Manager makes you get updates. I just have them downloaded and placed on a network share because I'm doing them quite a lot. But every 3 months or so, I stop using that. I take a new download and I get the main set of files that I need. So I have them pre-downloaded. It just checks the 14 file groupings. It's going to check for a hashtag. It's going to check to see how up to date they are. And as soon as it has verified them, it will let me go on. I'm just going to deploy it in English. For handheld devices, I'm just picking English again. I'm given a site code, 3-letter site code, Microsoft Ireland, MSI. I'm given the site name. You're still restricted to 3-letter site codes. Straight away, I'm going to say install this as a primary site, standalone. For the vast majority of people on this call, that's what you're going to be going for. You're not going to be joining a central hierarchy. In this demonstration, I have a central hierarchy, a CAS, a primary site, a secondary site, so you can see what they look like, and I'll explain to you why you might pick a CAS, but most people would just be installing a primary site of Config Manager. It says right now, look, if you accept this, there's no other way to join an additional hierarchy, okay? Well, that's only true right now, but when SP1 comes out, that won't be the case, okay? It asks me, where's the SQL instance that I'm going to install this? Now, I have this installed on this all-in-one media. When we go back and have a look at my environment that we're using here, I have SQL separated, which I always prefer to do, okay? What is the SMS provider? So where does it want that to be? The SMS provider is the object that brokers the connection from the SCCM console to the database. So one of the things that you could do if you had a large and intensive config manager environment is don't put the SMS provider onto your SCCM server, put it somewhere else. How do you want communication to happen with this site? Do you want it on HTTPS or standard HTTP? Obviously, HTTPS is for internet-based client management, which I'm not doing right now. But unlike 2007, you can pick that. You can pick that right away. So let me I just saw that coming in. Oop. Okay, so I'm just going to run it on a standard HTTP connection. I say next. I want to install a management point and a distribution point. Again, in a large environment, you would not put them on the primary site. You would keep them on a separate server. You wouldn't have your primary site server dealing with management point or distribution point requests at all. I don't want to join the customer experience improvement program, but you can. And what that does is it sends usage patterns over to Microsoft so they can see what you're doing with the product. And it's going to do an examination of the system. The thing that we're going to get straight away is we're going to get an issue with WSUS because I don't have Windows Update installed on the box. It isn't a big deal because you can pick where you want Windows Update. And then it's going to go and have a look at SQL, and it's going to have a look at permissions I need to publish to Active Directory. Okay, so I'm going to hit Begin Install.
Paul, just quickly, sorry to talk over you. We're having difficulty with the audio. I don't know what to suggest.
Is it just flashing in and out, or what's happening?
Conference ID number is not valid in the conference center. Is there another audio number? I assume this is for people trying to just come in and use audio and not be looking for.
I don't know, Dave.
No, you carry on. I'll try and struggle with it. For anyone who can hear me, if you can't hear me on audio, we are recording this. We'll get a recording out after. Carry on, Paul. Sorry.
Okay. Here are a couple of key things that you need for this environment. SQL has to be 10.50.28.11, which is SQL 2008 R2 SP1 cumulative update 6. This is absolutely essential. If you don't have that, it just will not deploy end story. Other important things on this is when we go and we have a look at the roles that this box needed and the features, it has to have IIS installed. What does it have to have on IIS? It has to have a full IIS installation. We don't use WebDAV. And other features that we need remote differential compression, we need bits, and we need .NET Framework 3.51 and .NET Framework 4. Now, what's super important is I would always install IIS before I install .NET Framework 3.5 or 4. And the reason for that is if you install the two .NET frameworks and then you go and install your actual IIS web server, your ASP.NET won't register on your system. So when I look at my application pools here, you can see that I have .NET Framework 4 ready to work as an application in the system. Okay, so a full IIS install, you need remote differential compression, you need bits, you need the ASP information, and then other things that are important for your install is ideally you want the schema extended and you want a systems management folder. You don't have to extend the schema to use or install SCCM. You can just have it without the schema installed, but it's a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the ass because clients can't automatically find what sites they should be automatically connecting to, because clients find that essentially through this service locator record inside Active Directory. Now, how do I end up with the systems management folder? Lots of you will have seen this from SCCM in the past. You can just go to ADSI edit. You can just go to system and say, create new object and create container. And there's container. And you just type system management. Okay? And when it's finished, you just got to make sure that the security of that is something like SCCM servers and they have full control so that they can write to that object. I have seen situations where even though that folder is created, servers have a problem writing your site data into there. And in that situation, what I've had to do is delete the system management container in ADSI edit, go and make your primary site server's computer account a member of the domain admins, reboot it. It will be able to create the folder system management and set the permissions on it, and then I can take it out. Okay, so other things that you're going to have to get people warmed up to and aware of is generally I would be using separate SQL. Okay, so generally for me, I would want to have my SQL server. Sorry about the resolution on these. I'm used to working at them on a desk. So I would have my SQL server, and my SQL server would be separate from my config manager environment. And I would always try and keep SQL in a separate environment. It wouldn't be sitting on my primary site server. So you can see my SQL instance here has my primary site database and WSUS and reporting, etc. Things that SQL DBAs aren't mad on is for this to work, for Config Manager to create that environment, the primary site's computer account needs to have local admin access on your SQL server. This is no problem in general if it's an all-in-one server or if you have a dedicated SQL instance for System Center. So if in advance you already know, I'm going to deploy Config Manager, I'm going to deploy Operations Manager, I'm going to have WSUS, I might be using VMM and a whole other bunch of management related databases where you can go and install your SQL instance, and have full control over it. When you're installing SQL, what do you need? You need the database engine, and you need, if you want, SQL reporting services and nothing else. You don't need analysis services, and you don't need any SQL replication, even though SCCM is heavily built on SQL replication, and we're gonna have a look at that and let it do its thing. So the very first role that we're gonna have a look at is this role, the CAS, the Central Administration Server. Okay, and the point of a CAS is to connect multiple primary sites, and I'm going to show you this now in a second. It's what I have in place. So a CAS, up until Service Pack 1, which will be released early next year, a CAS had to be installed at setup time. You couldn't install a CAS after after the fact and join a primary site to it. So a CAS supports 400,000 clients. Most people on the call will be saying, 400,000 clients, when am I ever going to get that big? I should actually change that to 400,000 objects. And I know that still sounds like an awful lot, but if you deployed this into an environment with 100,000 users, you'd expect about 125,000 client machines, probably 100,000 mobile devices. You might be talking 25,000 servers. So and then all the users. So you could have user objects, computer clients, etc., etc., etc. And in a large organization, you could get up to 400,000 clients. Easy enough. A CAS uses two-way SQL replication, but everything uses two-way SQL replication. I'm just spelling it out now, and I'll show you in a moment. The CAS and the primary site, or the primary site and the secondary site, all communicate through SQL replication, and if SQL replication ain't working, you haven't got a config manager environment. Important things for you to understand. No clients are actually pointed at the CAS. The CAS does not have a management point, and it can't respond to clients. Its only focus, its only purpose is centralized reporting, centralized administration. Okay, so if you had a primary site in America and a primary site in Europe, or a primary site in Dublin and one in Galway, and you wanted to manage them from one location, you install a CAS. After SP1 comes out, you'll be able to join a CAS to a primary site after the fact. You can't do it right now. Okay, so if I just jump on and give you a look at my environment here. Okay, I have a CAS, I have a primary site, I have a couple of SQL servers supporting them, and then I have a secondary site. Okay, and if I look at monitoring and I look at database replication, you can see that the CAS goes from parent site to child site. Okay, you can see the SQL Server certificate that they're mutually exchanging so that they can replicate. You can see the SQL Server port and the SQL Service Broker port. Now pay attention to this for a second. The SQL Server Broker port is not configurable through standard SQL management tools. You can't get into SQL and go, where is my broker port? It doesn't exist. If you go to your SQL server, and on your SQL server you go to your standard configuration tools, and you go to standard configuration manager, and you look at your protocols, you're not going to see your broker service. Okay, So if I go to TCP and I go in and have a look at it, all of this is set at the time of the config manager install. You can see my standard 1433 SQL port, but you can't see the broker service. So if you just have a look here, you look at my child site, it's replicating on 4022. The parent site is replicating on 4022. In my experience, the only way to get a CAS primary or primary and secondary to work is to make sure you have matching broker ports, and then you cannot ever use dynamic ports for SQL for config manager. It's not able to discover a dynamic port. So if you have a SQL instance whereby you have, you've installed a SQL Server, you put your CAS on it, you install a second instance and you put your primary site on it, which is something that I do quite a lot. Your primary site, you have to go back into your configuration tools and you have to change your dynamic port, which is what SQL will give you, to a static port. For those of you who are used to, SQL 2000, SQL 2005, when we were installing instances, we used to be able to say the instance runs under a particular port. We used to have a lot more configuration at the setup time. We don't have it anymore, so you just have to go back in and do some retrospective work. The SQL connection between the CAS and the primary site, so forget the CAS and primary site, let's just say between the hierarchy. So between a secondary site, primary site and CAS, all communication, all packets, all users, everything are replicated through SQL replication. And because of that, they have given you a replication link analyzer right inside the product. I'm on 2 monitors. So right inside the product, it will go and check the broker service and it will say no issues are detected. And that's what you want to see, and it will write an XML and a log file for you to go and see what's happened. Between a primary site and a secondary site, and all of this replication is configured by the installer, and inside the installer you do not have SQL replication services or SQL publishing anywhere within your SQL environment. Config Manager does this through the broker service only. There's one exception to this, and the one exception to this is it's possible for you in a role to add additional management points. Okay? And when you add, and I'm going to explain them in a second, when you add an additional management point, you can tell a management point to connect to a SQL replica. And the idea of that is to take the load off your production SQL that the config manager database has been written to and read from all the time. And in that situation, you use SQL replication. But and I've installed enormous environments and I haven't had to use replica databases yet. However, if you had a very large DMZ that perhaps you wanted to put a management point and distribution point for internet-facing clients on, one option is to create a replica database out there so that clients can communicate. I'm happy to talk about that in our last 15 minutes. It's a question that constantly comes up. How do I manage internet-based clients, and what roles do I, put outside into my DMZ? So here is here's my CAS. It's communicating. So if I just go and I have a look at my CAS and you look at the roles, it just is a component server. It has the SMS executive, it's a site server, and it has the config manager share, site system share. Compare that to my primary site server. It has a management point. it has a distribution point. People are able to communicate with this, and they can't with the CAS. Okay, so there's our CAS. Next one down is the primary site. So a single primary site, and this is important for you guys, can support 100,000 config manager clients. And when people hear that, they'll say instantly, well, I'll never use a CAS. You know, I can support 100,000 clients. And some of the reasons why people end up deploying multiple primary sites is because you're dispersing the effect of a primary site server going down in an environment. So if I had 5,000 people in Ireland and 5,000 people in the UK, you could say, well, why don't I install a CAS on 2 primary sites? And that way, if one of the primaries and the CAS go down, the other primary maintains, you know, full ability to service all its clients. So, you know, before you get anywhere near your 100,000 limit, people are deploying CASs for that reason. So here's what you can do with a primary site in 2012. You can have up to 10 management points. Okay, you can have 250 distribution points and 250 secondary sites. And there's very advanced security models now. For those who were using SCCM 2007, security was an absolute pain in the ass. You know, just locking down a user to be able to do something or controlling a user in one primary site was a pain. And they've come up with proper security roles. They've come up with security scopes, which are fantastic. And we've got permissions now on collections. Okay, so let's just go and have a look at some of those things. So if I just connect to my primary site, okay, so here I am sitting on my primary site, and what I'm trying to also give you a look at is, you know, from your primary site, it's very easy to move around your organization. You know, from the CAS, you can move from primary site to primary site, and you can have a look at secondary sites, and you know, you can create applications and get them to do things and get them to spread out, and you don't have to configure replication and you don't have to tweak replication. It all just happens automatically. If I go to administration and if I go to security and I go to security scopes and I just say create security scope and I just say MSI, which is you know, Microsoft Ireland. Once you have a security scope, you can assign something to that security scope. So, you know, for example, if I go to assets and compliance and I go to, you know, devices or a collection, or I go to, you know, software meeting or anything like that, it's possible for you to, okay, let's just go and create a device collection called PK limiting collections of systems. Okay, so within a collection, you know, what can I do with that now in terms of my design environment, in terms of it being, you know, primary, secondary, etc. And some of the things that I can do is when I go to a security role, or, you know, I have a look at an, you know, an application author, or I go into a security role, it's possible for me within security roles to say, I only want people to be able to see a specific collection. I only want them to be able to go into a particular scope, you know. So if I just add here SRV SQL, so you can see straight away when I add this user. It says, what security roles do you want them to be? And I could let them be a full administrator, okay? So that, like, they've got full config manager permissions. But then I could go in and say, you know, I want them to have permission over a collection, and on my collection I can give them PK. So you could be a full config manager administrator, and I could remove things like all systems and only give you access, for example, to PK. I can go in and say, you know, change my, add a security scope, and in security scope I can give you Microsoft Ireland as a security scope. So even though you're a config manager full administrator, you will only see computer objects that exist within the PK collection, and you will only see objects that have been assigned to you in the Microsoft Ireland security scope. So it's possible for you to go in through the primary site and do very advanced security modeling in such a way that people, you know, if you just had one primary site, you can have a primary site that is for servers and desktops, you know, servers and clients, and you can have a full administrator that can only see servers and one that can only see desktops, and you can do that times your secondary sites, etc., etc., etc. So, you know, if I just go to my site settings and I go to my sites and, you know, my secondaries, it's possible for me to set a security scope on this secondary site and remove default and say only people in Microsoft Ireland can see and manage and control that secondary site. Yeah. So it's very easy with a primary site to get in and lock down and manage what's happening with people. Here is a Visio that I drew up just to give you an understanding of what's happening, what's moving, what's communicating around your environment. If you do or do not have a CAS, it's irrelevant. Just take that as the top level environment. Okay? So your primary site server is communicating with your SQL server, and in our environment we have a secondary site server, and so my SQL server broker service is communicating between all three. And then in 2012 we really only have a very small number of ports. We have 445 server message block. Of course we're going to have that. We're going to have HTTP. Well, of course we're going to have that. And oh joy or rapture, we've got RPC, you know, random 135 connection, random secondary connections, but we can use the RPC lockdown tool to configure what ports it's going to come back in on. Okay, so you can see in this environment you need a very small subset of ports to communicate with your primary site server. You know, SMB on 445, your SQL broker service. Now I'm just using standard SQL broker service ports. You can change them to be whatever you want once you tell config manager in advance what they're going to be, and you can't change them afterwards. If you want to change them afterwards, it's a reinstall. You know, which is awesome if you're an IT consultant, because you get to go in and bill again. So bravo if the customer wants them changed afterwards. Okay, so just to explain some of the things you see on the right hand side, the management point, what does it do? The management point is a web service in IIS, and it is the thing which every client must communicate with on average once an hour to check if there's new policies or new actions that the client has to connect to. By default, you have to have one management point, and I recommend having two. Software update point is your is WSUS integrated with Config Manager. It's your ability to use WSUS to download patches and send them out through Config Manager environment, which we'll be looking at over the next couple of days. The distribution point, we're going to just jump in right now and have a quick look at. Asset Intelligence Point is the component that connects to Microsoft to do asset intelligence, clarification, bring a report down to clarify or to identify what pieces of software and applications are in your environment and what their requirements are. State Migration Point, if I'm doing an upgrade to Windows 7 or Windows 8, and you want to take user files from one machine to another, it's just basically a fancy network share. Your software catalog. So these 2 points we're covering tomorrow. They're a really big deal in Config Manager 2012. It's a web catalog running on Silverlight, and it works awesome. And Config Manager has the ability now to stitch a user to a device, and so we're now able to properly deploy software to a user instead of a computer. We can identify someone's primary device. A fallback status point, if I can't find a site inside my boundaries, where do I go? And reporting point is to install SCCM reporting. So one of the important things that we were looking at earlier that we've had on this list is the distribution point. Okay, so if we just have a look at the distribution point, has changed so much from 2007. Things that have changed in this, you'll see straight away Pixie. We don't have a Pixie services point anymore in Config Manager. It's just done through the distribution point. Okay, we can support multicast. You can deploy simultaneously 100 copies or 1,000 copies of Server 2008 or Windows 8 at the same time through multicast. We have an awesome thing here, which is a pre-stage content tick button. And what that does is it tells Config Manager that this distribution point is remote. So main office is in Galway. We have a small office in Dublin or Bangkok. And I don't want you to automatically push content to that distribution point. I want to send it in a DVD or a USB or something like that. And when it gets to the distribution point, Config Manager now has a simple command to bring it into the environment and make it available to you. It's important to note that if you make this tick now, by default, you cannot push any content to a distribution point automatically. There's a setting you can do to pick that on a per computer basis, but not automatically. You can see we have standard stuff like the content and what do we have there, and it now has a content validation where once a week, once a month, you can say check that the hash file on all the applications in here work, and then you can say what boundary groups am I associated with. Where am I allowed to get the content? Where is it allowed to come from? Okay. PowerPoint. So the MP, every client. Okay, so here's something that's very important about the management point. A management point is not network aware. What does that mean? It means if you have in a site, it's not network aware. It means if you have a very large site in one location and a secondary site somewhere else around the world, and you install 2 management points, you cannot control where the management point traffic goes from. So if you have 5,000 users in Europe and 500 users in America or Canada, if I install 2 management points in the same site, you could have all your clients in Europe going to Canada to do their management point communication. Okay? And that's why we would use a secondary site, because when you install a secondary site, you automatically get a management point, you automatically get a distribution point, and you can't configure that, but you can configure the boundaries of who's allowed talk in that location. Okay. The distribution point, you're allowed 250 per site. Okay. So you say, okay, 250, that's awesome. There's plenty of retailers in Ireland that would have more than 250 retail locations. And so if you wanted to use more than 250 distribution points, you would have to install a secondary or multiple secondary sites.
Paul, we've lost your video.
You've lost my video. Okay, I'm sorry. Share secondary monitor. It says currently sharing now for me.
Yeah, we've got it back now. Just disappeared.
Okay, thank you. So, and that's a good reason why you might go and you might pick a secondary site for a location, just because you can't support enough distribution points with your primary site. Okay, so in terms of distribution points, what is a distribution point? So I have a head office, wherever it is. I have a primary office, and a couple of secondary offices. It doesn't matter what type of Cisco WAS, or it doesn't matter what type of WAN compression traffic you have. There's no calculation in the world that says it makes more sense to have 100 people come across the WAN link to get Office 2010 or Windows 8 than for me to send it to a remote location once and everybody else to get it. Okay. In 2012, Config Manager 2012 fully integrates with Branch Office, Microsoft Branch Office. So if every desktop in a particular location was Windows 7, well, then you don't need a distribution point in that location. Windows 7 can, one client will take it, it will share it, and you don't need a distribution point. Awesome. Windows 7 or Windows 8. Go for your life. Here's my first design scenario. I've one location, I've 500 users, I've 10 servers. What would I do? I would install Windows Server 2008 or 2. You can't put this on 2012 until SP1. I'd install SQL 2008 or 2, Service Pack 1, Cumulative Update 6. And I would just have all the roles on that server. WSUS, Management Point, Distribution Point, everything that you want to install, your reporting point, everything. I would just put it there. Just as simple as that. Design scenario 2, 5 locations, 2,000 users, 60 servers. What would I do? I'd have my primary site server with my SQL database in the location that has the most amount of users and the most amount of console users. And then I'd more than likely have 4 distribution points in the environment. You can put a distribution point on a Windows desktop. I personally think that sucks. But if all you had was Windows desktops, well, that's what you're doing. Okay? What roles would you have? I'd possibly have one server for Config Manager and maybe a second role server. And on that role server, I might have a distribution point. I might put WSUS on that. It could also be my SQL database. If you already have a good SQL server, there's no reason why you can't just use that. Okay? Design scenario 3. 500 locations, 15,000 users, 300 servers, and a whole bunch of System Center products in place. What would I be looking at there? Well, 500 locations, you're definitely looking at a primary site and possibly a secondary site, unless you can use Microsoft, Branch Office, Branch Cache everywhere. So if I'm going to need 500 distribution points, you're going to need 2 sites, primary and secondary, or CAS primary, secondary, to support 15,000 users. If I had 10,000 users in one location and 5,000 users in a second location, or a large lump of users like that, anything more than 250, 300 users, I would be moving towards the secondary site for that location and set up a boundary for that location. If I know in advance, like 15,000 users, lots of servers, etc., 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 you're definitely, and the other SCCM products, you're definitely using a SQL instance just for System Center. And the SQL instance just for System Center, if it's going to be virtualized, which it can be, it has to be going on fast disks, super fast disks. And the three things that you'd want on fast disks are the one thing you'd want, if somebody said, look, we've got fast disks, but they're not very big, well, your tempdb would go on them. And then the next thing would be your log files, and the very last thing would be your config manager database. Yeah, it's not the important thing. Stuff isn't written to the database in real time. It's written to tempdb into your log file, and we're reading from there. So right now I'm on 45 minutes. Dave, do people out there, do you want to ask some questions? Would people like me to clarify what I have done there? Would anybody like to see anything or ask me anything?
There was Kieran had a question, if he's still online. Yeah. We lost a few people for audio. We've currently got 20 people on the call. Something mental went wrong if you dialed in with a real phone, as in an analog device, you didn't get any audio. Great. We'll work that one out for tomorrow, hopefully.
Okay.
Kieran's asking his question on IM. If you can see that coming in. And then we'll open up for anyone else who wants to ask questions on IM, or if your voice and audio is working, you can unmute your microphone and shout your question out as well. And Kieran can't type quick enough.
I don't mind, Kieran, if you want to stick on your mic and ask me it like on real audio. Up to you.
He may. I don't think he can.
Okay.
He's muted. He could do it. Here you go.
My question is, there are schema dependencies in order to install. Earlier you mentioned that they were optional. Yeah, okay. So you don't have to extend the schema. Okay. What extending, however, when running and install, it actually failed without them. Okay, so the schema installation is absolutely optional. And in the prereqs, it should just give you a warning. It shouldn't fail. It should just say, warning, the schema hasn't been extended, but it should let you continue. So I ran a proof of concept with about 1,000 live PCs without extending the schema, and extending the schema took 6 weeks of nonsense and the usual change request crap. And by the time it was done, we ran it and we moved on from there, but you don't have to have the schema extended.
Kieran's implying it failed without the prereqs done.
Yeah, I don't know why. It shouldn't. It should just allow you. And Kieran's gone again. Okay. And then if I could just show you folks, if you take a particular site like PSS Primary here, and I go to the properties of it, and I go to publishing, you can see where it has been published into systemcenter.local. Thanks, Ryan. Sorry, seem to keep dropping out of link. So that's where it has been published, but you don't need to extend the schema. It's totally optional, but do extend it. There's nothing to it. It's 7 attributes. They're static attributes. Go in and extend it. What permissions are required for the SCCM service running on the client? Does it need local admin? It does. Yeah, your SCCM service running on your client, it runs under local system. So you don't have to put it into any group. It just runs under local system, and off it goes. But it absolutely does have to have permission on it. Okay, more questions. Other things to note: Config Manager is still a bit of an old dog in that almost everything in Config Manager runs under local system or a computer account. You know, how it has become so advanced to what it is now and still doing that is beyond me, but it's still doing that, and off it goes. For me, I would always be running my SQL under a domain account, and when you run it under the domain account, make sure you have your SPN registered. Now, I would say the easiest way to do that is to go into your ADSI edit and pick your user account that's going to be, you know, there's my SQL Server service account, and from it just go in, just go to security, go to self, advanced, and on one of your selves you'll get update SPN. So read and write server principal name for the object. That's super essential, absolutely. Any other questions? In the design scenarios, does anybody have a design question or something that they're unsure of, or why they may or may not need, you know, a particular role, or what should be separated? Two more people are typing. Okay. While I'm waiting for those, what could you install on your config manager server? Well, you could have WSUS going. You could, it could be your full software deployment. It could also be your endpoint protection server, so it's doing all your antivirus. With the ability of SP1 to add a primary site to a CAS, any possibility of removing a primary site from a CAS if you deem it not necessary. So any possibility of removing a CAS from a primary, I presume, is what that means. So if you want to take a CAS out of a primary out of a CAS, or either way, I don't think so. I think the only options are to add them, and if you want to remove them, it's an uninstall, which you'll be delighted to know. So as I'm waiting for that, while SP1, when it comes out, SP1 is going to give us native support for Server 2012, for SQL 2012, and when it gives us support for SQL 2012, we'll be able to use SQL Always On, which is, clustering for the database without shared storage, and we'll be able to deploy Windows 8 out of the box, all from SP1. SP1 we hope will be out very early next year. Any other questions? Tomorrow, folks, here's what so this is very design orientated. It's just trying to get you to understand what we are likely to be doing. Tomorrow, we're going to look at application deployment methods, the application catalog, user device affinity, deploying an application just to a user, how Config Manager knows an object is on a user, looking to deploy SCCM using existing SQL Server. If it's higher than CU6, is that a problem? So that's a really good question, Keane. I recently just moved a database to a server that was higher than CU6, and I had no problem. Now, seeing as how, I presume you're talking about SQL 2008 or to SP2, and SP2 is a roll-up of the cumulative updates, so I imagine you're going to be okay, but I haven't actually done a clean install onto something higher, but I presume you're going to be okay. Okay, so folks, thanks a million for for this. We're going to finish 4 minutes early. I'm sorry about the sound issue. It is beyond my control.
Yeah, I'll try and find our local link expert and find out why it didn't work. Hopefully we'll get it working again for tomorrow. I have recorded this. I'm still recording it. I'm going to post it up on YouTube. There's an IT Pro channel up on YouTube. I'll mention it on the blog and I'll mention it on Twitter. And I'll send an email to everyone who registered as well, so you know where to find it.
And then just the last thing, folks, is we're doing 4 sessions of Config Manager. And we're going to, tomorrow is going to be application deployment, user device affinity, application catalog. Next day is going to be operating system deployment, capturing a WIM, firing it out. And then last day is going to be system health, status messaging, troubleshooting, custom reporting, DCM, like absolutely awesome part of Config Manager. And when we have that done, we're going to move on to Operations Manager, and then we're just going to cycle through this sort of level 200 overview of, the Ops Manager, Config Manager, VMM, Orchestrator, and Service Manager. And as soon as we have this base level done, we're then going to start getting into deep dives on specific application things, specific, SQL configurations, multiple SQL instances on a box, etc., etc., etc. So the sessions will be an hour, just like this. They'll be fairly relaxed. There won't be any sales pitch. There'll just be as much technical knowledge as I can try and share with you. So thanks very much for your time today. I hope you'll be able to join tomorrow, and I look forward to talking to you then.
Cheers, guys. Thanks. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Milt.